about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's John here from Tutor Stew HQ. Welcome you to this, our fourth A-level geography live stream session. 5:30 on a Tuesday. Always my favourite time of the week. Tonight we're going to be talking about hazards, perceptions, and human responses. So lots to get through. Big warm welcome to anybody watching us and participating live, and also very warm welcome to anybody joining us on replay. And as we know from previous weeks, that's hundreds, if not thousands, of people joining in. Now, we've got our ever-present Catherine with us tonight. Good evening, Catherine.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And we're joined, he's come back for a second go with us. We're joined by Gary. Good afternoon, Gary.
Good evening, everyone. Good to hear you all.
Excellent stuff. If you've not watched one of our live streams before, where have you been? Is the first question. The second point to make is, please, we would love to see your participation in this event. So we've got the chat window in YouTube, and if you'd like to join us, please give us your answers in that chat window. Just pop them in there. Sometimes it's really easy, like a number or a letter. Sometimes a slightly longer suggested answer. So we've got about 30 minutes of activities, plus a bit of input from Gary and from Catherine. So I think we're ready to go, guys. Are you two ready?
Yeah, I mean, this session might be a little bit different to what some students have come across, because when we look at hazards, often it's all about the actual processes of the volcanic eruptions or the earthquakes or the tropical storms. What we're focusing on today is something that I find very interesting and exciting, thinking about how people perceive hazards, how people respond to hazards. And we've even got some models chucked in for later, so it should be a good session.
Models are always valuable. We're starting off with a little bit of categorise, I think, are we not?
Yeah, over to Gary for some categorise.
Here we go.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get you thinking nice and early this evening. We've got on screen 8 natural hazards, and what we'd like you to do is to put them into one of 3 groups, which you can see on screen there. So, are the hazards geophysical? Are they atmospheric? Or are they hydrological? And what I'd like you to do is, you can see each one of them has a number attached. Can you write the type of hazard in the chat box would be good, and also the corresponding number. Maybe it's just G for geophysical, A for atmospheric, and H for hydrological might be a system to use. Okay, folks, you're going to have 60 seconds. Let's go. Okay, let's see how we've done. Thanks for your answers, Alice. That's much appreciated. Thanks very much. Let's see how let's see what we've done there. So the correct answers are just appearing on screen. Thanks for your answer there, Tarantino. Much appreciated, and Anna as well. We've got 4 geophysical on screen there. We've got volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, landslides, and avalanches. Atmospheric, 3 of those: tropical storms, tornadoes, and heat waves, and just 1 hydrological all by itself there. That is a flood. Okay, so we've had to go categorising hazards. Over to you, Catherine, for maybe how it's not quite that easy.
Thank you very much. So actually, can we neatly categorise hazards? I would argue that there are some hazards that are very difficult to pop into an easy category column. If we think about tsunami, then we might think about tsunami as a geophysical hazard because of it being triggered by an earth movement, but it could also be considered a hydrological hazard because it is going to cause flooding. What about drought? Is that something that's created because of the atmospheric processes? Well, yeah, but also it means a lack of water, so it could be hydrological. And in the categories that we saw just now in the little game, we had avalanche. Would avalanche be something that is geophysical because it's a mass movement, or would it be hydrological because, of course, ice is one of the forms that water takes? So the world is complicated. Another complication is, are these natural hazards? The title of this slide says unnatural hazards because a lot of the time the actual event that happens may be natural, but the hazard it causes, the damage to people and their possessions, maybe that is related to some unnatural features. For example, poverty could be something that could exacerbate the impact that the hazard is having. The world basically is a complex place. So we've had a little think there about different types of hazards, but also people are going to see those hazards in different ways. Perception is all about how people see hazards. For some people, a hazard may just be an inconvenience. It must be like, oh no, I'm going to have to not visit my holiday home this weekend because there's a hurricane that's been spotted heading our way. Some people might be like, oh no, I'm better put some boards up on the windows. But for others, a hazard could be a threat to their lives. This can be decided due to economic development of a place. So some people may have a very different perception of a hazard, depending on whether the individual person is rich or poor, but it can also depend on the wealth in the location. And we have to be very careful as A-level students. Like I said, the world is a complex place. We need to recognize and relish that complexity. We need to think about avoiding stereotypes. Sometimes you can see books, or you can see adverts on the TV that almost suggest that a place that is experiencing poverty will have people there that are just helpless. But people that are surviving through poverty are likely to have lots of resilience and determination, and poverty does not mean helplessness. So here's a few examples. If you look at the first picture here, we've got Miami Beach in Florida, beautiful place, hotel owners here. They are gonna not be very happy if they have got a hurricane heading their way, but they have got insurance. They are going to be able to claim back damages. They are likely to have lots of things in place, like shutters to pull down over to windows to protect them. They may well evacuate from the area. There are many things they can do that mean that they may not be so worried about a hazard, because it's not so likely that their life is going to be threatened. So they have lots of economic losses which could occur. But like I say, they've also got ways that they can risk share. They can make sure that they're not going to go bankrupt because of things like insurance. And then we've got the next picture here of a hut on a beach in Antigua in the Caribbean. And you might look at a structure like that and just think, wow, that is just going to fall to bits if there is a big storm that comes across the Caribbean. But that might actually be the point. Sometimes the way that people might cope with a hazard such as a hurricane is think, well, actually, if I make my roof out of something lighter, if it gets blown away and it hits me, it's not going to kill me, and I can quite easily rebuild afterwards. So it might be that people are making some decisions that at first you might think, whoa, have they thought this through? But maybe they haven't really thought this through, and they've thought about their local situation and their resources, and they've made decisions based on that. And then we see in the final picture there, you can see hopefully down the bottom, there is a church at the bottom there of the slope. And you can see we've got snow on the slope, and that church could be maybe threatened by avalanches. Now, there could be many things that could be going through the priest's mind if there was thought of an avalanche. Maybe you've got the trees there that could provide protection. So the priest may feel, I'm going to be okay because I've got these trees protecting and the snow will hit them first. Maybe the priest will be thinking that God is going to protect me, and whatever happens, we'll get through this. So there's many different ways that people may perceive hazards, and I find this fascinating. Now, we talked about economic determinants, but also there are cultural determinants. People that live in a society will have certain culture. Culture is all about the beliefs and the way of life in a society. And when we think about cultural determinants, we may be considering religion. We might be thinking about views of science. We may be thinking about other aspects of a people's culture. And you can see in the picture there, that is a scene from Hawaii, and you can see offerings being made there. So an example, St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Caribbean, some people might say, why would you live on this island? Because it has Le Soufriere volcano. And you might be sat there thinking, why would anybody live on an island where there is a volcano? But one of the reasons is when you look at that picture, it is absolutely gorgeous. And what a beautiful view. I could quite happily go and visit St. Vincent and the Grenadines and sit and have a cup of coffee in one of those beautiful buildings. So people want to live there. It's beautiful. It's their home. And they trust in the scientists to keep them safe. The volcano is very carefully monitored, and there are evacuation plans in place. So if it looks like the volcano is likely to erupt, people know what to do. They know when they should report to the harbour. The boats are all arranged for them to be able to leave the island. So the perception of the residents in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the perception is that they can rely on the science. They are going to be okay. So let's have a little think back over some of those concepts and ideas that we have just looked at. So this is a picture grid. And so what's going to happen is that a question is going to be revealed. And I would love it if you could pop your thoughts as to what the answer might be to the question into the chat box. So let's see the first question. So what do I mean by perception? Can you write into the chat box what we mean when people have got a certain perception of something? So let's see your ideas in the chat box. What do we mean by perception? And also, as we play this game, we are going to be revealing a picture on the picture grid. So we'll keep thinking as well about what the image might be behind the grid. Right, okay, so let's see the answer and see if people have got it right. What is perception? It's a way someone sees something. And in the AQA A-level syllabus, there's a real emphasis on thinking about aspects beyond just knowing how hazards happen and the impact of them, but also knowing about perception of hazards. So let's see the next, first of all, the picture reveal and the next question. So why is it sensible to build houses with roofs made from leaves in the Caribbean? So let's see any answers in the chat box. And you might also want to start thinking about what the image might be in the grid as well. So why might people in the Caribbean be really sensible to use things like leaves for their roofs? Oh, thank you, Anna. I can see you've got some good thinking going on there. Fantastic. Right. Okay. So let's reveal the answer there. So leaves over the roofs. You can make some really good roofs with leaves, and if they fall in, they aren't going to crush you. And also, they're very easy to replace. So using something like banana leaves, which are large and going to be nicely waterproof when the rain does come, could be a very sensible thing to do. And thank you very much to Alice and Anna for your answers. So let's see the next bit of the picture and the next question. So, why might a rich person in Miami perceive storm threats differently from a poor person? Think back to those images we saw earlier and have a little think about how this could make a difference. You also might be starting to get a bit of an idea of what the image might be that's in the background of the picture grid. So let's see the answer. Why might a rich person in Miami perceive storm threats differently to a poor person? They can afford insurance. They can afford to evacuate. One of the things people often don't realize about things like evacuation is that if you haven't got any money, how are you going to evacuate unless someone helps you? So a lot of people, particularly in incidents like Hurricane Katrina, people were told to evacuate, but not everyone did. They didn't necessarily have transport. If they did have transport, they didn't necessarily have enough fuel. They didn't necessarily have anywhere to go. So if you're a rich person, you are likely to have more options. And insurance is a great way of risk sharing. Okay, let's see the next question and some more of the pretty picture. Why do some Hawaiians leave offerings of leaves and flowers outside their homes? So if there's a volcanic eruption happening near to someone's home in Hawaii, they might outside their house put a line of leaves or a line of flowers. So let's have a little think about what that could be about. And I've got a big dream of maybe being able to make it to Hawaii next Easter. So who knows, I might be able to go and check this out in real life. That'd be fantastic. Oh, Tutor to You said the picture in the background looks like a swimming pool. That is definitely related to what it is, but what might be special about this swimming pool related to the idea of hazards? So keep thinking about that as well. So let's see the answer to the question in the next picture, next bit of the picture. Right. Okay. So yeah. So religion and culture is very important in perception of hazards, and Hawaiians may leave leaves in a line across their driveways to keep the goddess Pele happy, and then they hope that the lava isn't going to come over that line of leaves and damage their houses. Okay. On to the next question. Okay, so we've got a bit more of the picture there, and we have another question. Why don't people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines live in fear when they live so near to a volcano? Oh, thank you, Anna. You've been popping more answers in there. Really appreciate that. That's lovely, and you're coming up with fantastic ideas. Alice, great stuff too. Well done. So have a little think about the people at St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Why aren't they living their lives in fear? They're pretty laid back about having that volcano there. Why is that? Oh, Tarantino, yes, you've got the correct answer for the picture there about it being a naturally geothermally heated pool. Maybe someone could suggest where the photograph might be of as well. And Alex, right, that's an excellent answer. Let's reveal the answer. So Alex has got this spot on. Yeah, they've got evacuation plans and monitoring. They're trusting the scientists to be able to warn them. So again, this is down to your culture. This is down to your beliefs. And the people are thinking, yeah, the scientists are monitoring and they will warn us if we need to get out. So excellent answers there, particularly from Alex and Anna. Thank you. Okay, let's see the next question. Right, so this will give you a big clue as to the picture. Right, Tarantino got there already. So why do so many tourists visit Iceland despite its many volcanoes? So let's think about this perception of hazards. You know, if everybody was just terrified of volcanoes, no one would go to Iceland because it has just been made from volcano after volcano through time. But many tourists go there, and I was lucky enough to go there. So why might tourists visit Iceland, even though it's got many volcanoes and it has obviously earthquakes as well? Any thoughts? Okay, thank you for your suggestions. So let's have a little look at the answer. So there's so many things you can see in Iceland. You have already guessed that you've got the picture there that shows the hot pools. People can go and see the geysers. They can go to Geyser Park, which is where the name came from. And they feel safe because Iceland, again, has got a lot of researchers and scientists making sure that they're monitoring what's going on. People receive warnings. There's evacuation plans. Iceland has got all sorts of different adaptations to cope with its nature. So you can see there a picture, and let's reveal the title. So that's tourists at the secret lagoon in Iceland enjoying the hot pool. So there's several lagoons you can go to in Iceland. It says Blue Lagoon. This is Secret Lagoon. If you have a chance to get a chance to go there, not only can you see the pool there, but also in the foreground you've got like little bubbling mud pools and little geysers that go off. And in the background you might be able to see over on the left-hand side, you can see some greenhouses because the warm water is also being used to provide heat. So the greenhouses can be used to grow things like tomatoes and peppers because there isn't a massive amount of farmland in Iceland. It's actually great being able to grow those things in the areas where you've got so much of this natural heat. So lots of great answers there coming through on the live chat. Thank you very much for that. And we're over to Gary now.
Okay, everyone, we're going to have a look at how human responses can be categorized into different groups and some of the characteristics of those responses. Now, in some parts of the world, the human response is very much one of fatalism. And fatalism is this fatalistic approach of accepting that the event is going to happen and absolutely nothing can be done by the community or by the individual about that particular natural event. Sometimes it does depend quite heavily upon the level of development in the country. Sometimes it's characteristic of places that perhaps have lower levels of development and lower levels of adaptation and mitigation, but not always. Another response which people can put in place to natural hazards is prediction. And what would be really useful for your syllabus, whichever one it is that you're studying, is that you familiarize yourself with some different methods of prediction of natural hazards. And volcanoes and earthquakes works quite well for this. So people and scientists in various places around the world monitor situations, monitor earthquakes, monitor volcanoes, so that people can be warned that a hazard event is likely. For instance, that one, the volcano that's currently erupting over in La Palma in the Canary Islands, it's heavily monitored, that, and people were evacuated well in advance of that particular volcano erupting. Keep an eye on that one. It's all over the news at the moment. Another response is one of adjustment or adaptation. And what that's all about is people making changes to their everyday life and adapting their practices in some sort of way. So it could be, for instance, making buildings more aseismic, more earthquake proof. It could be, for instance, if you're referring to flooding, it could be constructing larger sea walls. And what you're doing there in adaptation is you're accepting that the natural event is going to take place, but you're doing something about it in order to restrict damage to property and, potentially to save lives. Okay, if we could just move on to the next slide. We've got 3 other responses which can be put in place. And one of the words, I think, Alex, you've mentioned this earlier on in the chat. Tarantino, I think you mentioned the word as well. Mitigation is a key piece of terminology. Okay, so there's a key difference between adaptation and mitigation. And mitigation is reducing the likelihood of that natural event actually occurring. Putting strategies in place to mitigate. I've just been covering climate change, for instance, with year 10s at the moment, and mitigation strategies. If you're talking about climate change and, potentially flooding as a consequence, for instance, reducing the amount of carbon dioxide which is pumped into the atmosphere would be a good mitigation strategy. Be very clear in your minds the difference between adaptation and mitigation strategies, and learn some examples of both of those strategies being put in place in different places around the world. Management is another key response, and we're going to have a look at some models to do with management a little later on. But for instance, in various places around the world, hazard maps are put in place to plan land use and to put evacuation plans into place. Montserrat, an island not too far from the St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which we looked at earlier on, has a very, very clear land use map where the island is categorized or split into 3 areas, where areas which are really at great risk from a volcanic eruption taking place there, areas at medium risk, and areas at low risk. So hazard mapping is a very useful management strategy which is utilized in some places around the world. And finally, risk sharing is another response. For example, insurance policies can be taken and put in place where, just like your parents may well do with your property, put an insurance policy in place. Obviously, this time we're talking about natural hazards, where people pay a premium and receive compensation should they experience losses because of that particular natural hazard. Okay. We're going to move on and back over to you, Catherine, for some responses to hazard risk. I think we've lost Catherine. I can go through these. I can go through these fine. May well have been my job. Sorry about that, Catherine. If I've landed that over to you.
No, that's fine. Are you okay to do it?
Yeah, I can talk through this. I can do this one if you like.
Go for it.
Okay. So, folks, on the left-hand side, we've got an example of some hazard mapping, and this one particularly is of a flood zone. What quite often you have around some of the larger rivers, not too far from us, we've got a river up in the northeast, the River Tyne, and you may well have one close to where you live, but there are maps that are produced which map the risk level from that particular river should it flood, and the areas are categorized into high risk, medium risk, and low risk. Have a look on the Environment Agency website and you'll be able to find some really good examples of hazard mapping of flood zones. On the right-hand side, we've got some adaptation that's being put in place. These are houses, as you can see there, on stilts in Cambodia. So they're realizing that they are vulnerable to natural hazards, in this case, flooding. And what they've done is they've taken measures to adapt to that situation, and they've elevated their houses on stilts. So there's two good examples of strategies.
Okay, so Gary, are you going to do the chains of analysis, or shall I have a go at this one?
You can do this one, Catherine. I shall hand the baton back over to you.
Brilliant, lovely. Okay, so chains of analysis. I love a bit of a chain of analysis because when you are doing extended exam answers, you are going to need to think about making points that will link together. So let's have a little go at an activity related to this. So these are not in the right order. This is currently all muddled up. And what I'd like you to do is think, what order would you put these in to make a chain of analysis? So have a little think about which one is likely to go first. And so, for example, we might maybe have number 5 as your first one. And then can you suggest the numbers to make this into the correct order? So let's see your suggestions in the chat bar. So if we started off with number 5 and thinking about in some hazards, in some areas, hazards are carefully monitored and hazard maps are created. Have a think which number statement would come next and what would the next one be, and the next one and the next one. So we can put together a chain of analysis. Have a little think about how this develops. Right, okay, let's reveal. I'm hoping now that I gave you the right one as the first sentence. Yeah, phew. So brilliant. So it looks like wow, Anna, that was super quick and you got it spot on as well. So we got some areas hazards are carefully monitored and hazard maps are created. These can be used to inform planning decisions such as where to build housing. Such housing could also include adaptations to reduce the risk of damage in the event of a hazard. So can you see there how we're sort of like, you know, coming up with an initial point, but then building on it and building on it. And that's what you need to be doing in your extended answers, in your exam papers, is making a point, but then developing that point. And then it goes on to say, for example, an adaptation employed in earthquake zones is diagonal cross bracing for stability within the design of homes. Of course, the need for adaptation is less important if effective mitigation against a hazard takes place. So what we've got going on here, you can see this analysis, the chain there. Also think about the connectives that we've got there. So we've got these sentences thinking, you know, each one is leading on to the next one. It's forming that chain. Keep that image of forming a chain in your minds when you're answering those exam questions. Okay, so I think we've got a bit more theory now. So just a little bit of more theory here. There are some different things that affect human responses, and this could be the hazard incidence. Now, hazard incidence means how often this hazard occurs. So if you are in a place where there has not been a problem for a long time, then you might not be so sure how to respond in the occurrence of a hazard event. But if you are somewhere where there has been an hazard event more recently, then you might be more prepared. So, for example, we saw St. Vincent and the Grenadines earlier, and there was a volcanic eruption there. I think it was 1979. So quite a few people still remember that. And so that means that they might be more prepared. Then we've got intensity and magnitude, and a lot of people get confused between these two. Intensity is about the strength of the effect of the hazard event. Magnitude is about the energy that was involved in the hazard event. So, for example, in the earthquake, how much energy is being released would be the magnitude. The impact, the strength of the effects of the earthquake would be the intensity. And we can use this in relation to different hazards. And then we have distribution. When we're thinking about the incidence of a hazard, sometimes you might have a hazard that only affects a very small area. and sometimes it might be an enormous area, and that's going to again affect how people respond to a hazard. If you're looking at just something that's affecting, maybe you're in Hawaii and you've got an eruption where the lava is flowing down and people know the path it's likely to take and people are evacuating a few streets, that is very different from if we had a very different type of volcano erupt in a much more explosive way, which could affect a large area. And then, of course, we've touched upon this earlier, the level of development. Level of development could be about, I've put rich there in inverted commas, because it could be about wealth, it could be about poverty, but also it could be about organisation. It could be about whether the government is stable enough to have put plans into place and to make sure that people know what to do, whether education programmes are available to make sure that young children know what to do if the hazard event strikes them they're in school. You can sometimes have, in a country which is less developed, you might have an excellent government, but you might have a government maybe who are not so on the ball with those things. So let's have a bit of a fun game now, a little bit of fun, because we've been doing lots of hard work. So this is a higher or lower activity, and we're thinking here about the magnitude of volcanic eruptions. We're thinking here about the energy that is being released. So when we look at volcanic eruptions, we can measure them using the Volcanic Explosivity Index, the VEI. The first one we're starting with here is Krakatoa in 1883, very famous eruption, which had a VEI of 6. So let's have a look at the name of our next volcanic eruption. Oh my goodness. I've just realised I've got to say this. Right, okay, I think it's something like I can't say it. The volcano from Iceland in 2010. I know the last bit is Jökull, I think. But can you put in the chat bar now if you think that the VEI for that eruption was higher or if it was lower? Also, if Gary would like to jump in here to pronounce that volcano for me, you're very welcome.
It starts with E, Catherine, and then after that, I'm struggling a little.
Someone taught me how to, my wonderful colleague Jacob taught me how to say this, because Jacob is a volcanologist, and I feel like I'm letting the side down here by not being able to say this. I'm just, just letting the whole team down here. Right, okay, so let's have a reveal now as to is that higher or lower. So it's VEI of 4. So it was an eruption that had a large impact on quite a large area because of the ash cloud rising up and causing problems for air traffic. So a lot of people heard of this eruption. It affected a large area. The explosivity index, though, was lower than Krakatoa. So what is our next eruption that's going to come up? Okay, I can say this one, Mount Nyiragongo. So Mount Nyiragongo erupted this year, 2021. So do we think this is going to be an eruption with a higher volcanic explosivity index or a lower one? What do you think? Oh, Ben's put something really helpful, said it's pronounced Eyjafjallajökull. Let's go with that one. Eyjafjallajökull. I'm probably still getting it wrong. If anyone's listening from Iceland, I apologise profusely. Okay, so let's see the answer now for Mount Nyiragongo. Okay, so it was only an eruption with an explosivity of 1. So you can see we get great variation here in the energy of these eruptions. So let's go for the last one we've got on our list here. So Mount Etna. Mount Etna, we hear about in the news a lot. Many people have visited Mount Etna. I haven't been fortunate enough to yet, but I'd love to. Do you think that the eruption in 2013, which, to be honest, has been sort of like Mount Etna bubbles on and off a lot of the time. So do you think the VEI was higher than Nyiragongo or not? Let's have your ideas. Right, I think this one's too easy for you, so let's have the reveal. So yeah, it was going to be higher than 1, really, wasn't it? So we can see here that volcanic explosivity index of 3. So hopefully playing this little game is going to help you remember some of the eruptions that have happened, but also this idea of measuring explosivity with this volcanic explosivity index. Okay, so we threatened you with some models. So over to you, Gary.
Okay, sorry about that non-pronunciation of the Icelandic volcano, Catherine. Do apologise. My probably pronunciation in English would be terrible, but Geordie English would be much worse for all of our listeners. So do apologise, everyone.
It's
I do
something we
like
can both work
Ben's.
on. We both have to
I
go
do
away
like
and work on it.
Ben's. Yeah, Ben's phonetic spelling's quite good. We'll go with that. Anyway, okay, folks, let's have a look at some models this time. Now, what's going to be really useful in your revision is learning or making sure that you've revised these 2 models, which I'm going to go through with you, and applying them to the case studies which you've learned with your individual teachers in class. Let's have a look at this first one, which is called the Parkes model. Now, what this does is it looks at it uses a systems approach to look at how a community responds to a natural hazard. And if we just start over there on the left-hand side, we've got quality of life on that that y-axis. Always get them mixed up. So quality of life on the y-axis. And if we just start moving along that green line, we can see that quality of life is kind of continuing as normal, and then boom, okay, the community experiences the hazardous event. And there is a decline in quality of life. So we're in that disruption phase now, as people start to really suffer due to that natural event taking place. Down the bottom, you can see this sort of like approach that this model takes place. So we're in this relief phase now, where various aid organisations and local governance, if there is any effective governance, brings in action. And what happens over time as we move along the axes, the x-axis, get those right. As over time, what happens is the community hopefully returns to normality. And once we get to that sort of blue dotted line on the sort of far right-hand side of this model, then normality has been resumed. And there's a really useful word which isn't on the model itself, which you may well be able to apply to this particular model. And it's a really important word for whichever syllabus it is that you're studying, and that is one of resilience. This model is looking at how resilient the community is. How quick is it able to bounce back, if you want to use that terminology, bounce back to normality? Does it take a long time? Does it take a short time? And you can draw different Parkes curves here, this curve that you're drawing. You could draw different curves in some of your essay answers and apply them to different hazardous events. And you can see on the far side, actually, in some instances, actually quality of life, after the tectonic event or natural event takes place, the quality of life is actually better than it was in the first instance, with the construction of things such as, for instance, aseismic buildings, improved sea walls, or improved infrastructure. Okay, so we'll move on to our next one, which is at the hazard management cycle. Now this one, slightly different. We're looking at management, obviously, given the title of the model. And this splits management into 3 distinct phases. So if we start off with the blue, we've got the pre-disaster phase. Now this is what's going on, obviously, before a disaster strikes a community, and you've got some sort of things which a community should be doing in preparation. For instance, putting mitigation strategies in place if possible, using adaptation methods like we saw in some of the photographs earlier on. And then bang, just in the sort of top right hand corner of this diagram, the natural disaster takes place and the community goes into a response phase. The management takes on the response phase, and we've got things like mobilization of emergency services. How effective is the local government or the governance in trying to respond to that particular event? Then, just down the bottom of the model and moving into the yellow, we've got this post-disaster phase. Now, this often is, a fair time after the natural disaster is taking place. But it's things like reconstruction. It's things like, like building, like rebuilding a community, putting infrastructure back in place, sort of starting to think about what's going to happen prior to the next natural disaster taking place. And then we move into the pre-disaster phase. So it's going round and round. So we're in a pre-disaster phase, planning again for the next event taking place, and round it goes. And what will be really useful for you students is to, again, apply some of your case studies which you've learned to this particular model, and just know specifically for whichever case study it is. For instance, with one of my groups, we study the Nepal earthquake. So what's going on pre-disaster in Nepal? What's going on what happened in the response stage? And then what happened in the post-disaster phase? Yes, that does look rather volcanic or something like a meteor, Catherine. But yeah, that is, folks, that top right, that is the disaster taking place. Okay, just to recap some of our learning, we've got some true or false questions. And what I'd like you to do in the chat is just to write the letter T for true, false for obviously false. Okay, so let's have a look at this statement. The Park model, I did mention it in the chit chat. The Park model uses a system approach to explore how people respond to a hazardous event. Is that true or is that false? Let's see what we've got. So we've got a few answers coming through. Thanks for that. Well done, Joanne. That's a great answer. That one is true. Fantastic. Next question. Models such as the Park model can be used to predict how people will respond to future hazardous events. Is that true or is it false? T or F in the chat, please. 50-50 chance. Excellent. Thanks for that one. That one is false. So there's no prediction of future events. It's purely how people respond. Thanks for Anna. That's a great answer. Next one, last one up. We've got the Park model allows us to compare the responses to different hazard events. The Park model allows us to compare the responses to different hazard events. Is that one true or is that one false? Again, 50-50. Thanks for that. Gahalanlo, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I'm not doing well with pronunciations this afternoon. That is true. Well done. Well done, folks. That was an excellent answer. Well done, Anna. Well done, Tarantino. Okay, let's move on. And I think I'm back over to you, Catherine, for this next section, I believe.
There's just one more true or
Oh,
false.
sorry. I'm jumping forward. Sorry, folks, we're jumping forward. We've got one more true or false. Thanks, Catherine. Keep me right. So the hazard management cycle. So a question about that one. So the hazard management cycle is not relevant to local people and organisations, only the government. Again, true or false? T or F? Thanks for your answers, folks. Thank you very much. That one is false. It is relevant to local people. They're interested in what goes on. They're interested in what goes on, how the local community and how their government respond to tectonic or even any natural hazard. Could be tectonic, could be hydrometeorological. Okay, thanks for your answers, folks. We've got one more, I believe. I think I think that we didn't have one more. We're off to case studies.
Right,
Over
brilliant.
To you,
Thank you ever so much, Gary. Thank you. Right, okay, so case study alert. So for the AQA specification, and I believe the EdExcel specification as well, you need to study a case study of a multi-hazardous environment beyond the UK. Now, a lot of you are likely to study Haiti. Haiti, multi-hazardous in that you have got the problems there with earthquakes. You've got also tropical storms, and Haiti is a very interesting place to study, but also it's a place that when you are studying it, you are likely to get very angry because Haiti is somewhere where there's been, a lot of death and disruption because of hazards. And you have to question sometimes about, does this really need to happen? Because there are many, many, many ways to be able to mitigate so that hazards aren't going to affect somewhere so much, to adapt. But the problem in Haiti is poverty. And the issue is that the international community is not really coordinating and supporting Haiti in a way that means that it can cope with its natural hazards. So if you've studied Haiti, you've probably found it a fascinating, but also enraging case study. And just keep up with what goes on in Haiti, because it's not a case of, there was an earthquake and now we can forget about it. We've got repeated incidences of these hazards. It's multiple different hazards. And you've got this whole background as well of the poverty, which is linked in with issues such as colonialism. It's a fantastic, interesting topic, but like I say, also a very upsetting one. And then we've got another case study which is needed for the AQA specification. You need to look at a specified place at a local scale in a hazardous setting. You might look at Cumbria in the UK, which is shown in the picture here. Also, some schools look at Kobe as a place on a sort of smaller scale that is in a hazardous setting and thinking about how the hazard has affected people in the communities in that area. So let's have a little look now at how this could look in an exam. So in sessions that I've been looking at previously with these sessions for Tutor to You, we've looked at 20-mark questions. But what is interesting on the AQA exam papers when we're looking at the hazards topic is there's a new beast for us to consider. There are 9-mark questions. And so let's have a little look at a 9-mark question here. So it says, to what extent do we agree that economic determinants are more important than cultural determinants in relation to the perception of storm hazards? So let's break that question down a little bit. So the first thing to consider is the command word. To what extent? That means how much do you agree? So you're going to need to make a judgment here. This is a question involving evaluation. Okay, what are we evaluating though? Let's look at the next bit. So we've got there economic determinants and cultural determinants. So remember, we looked earlier in this presentation at the idea of economic determinants, thinking about things like the wealth that there is in an area could make a difference to perception of a hazard. But also then you've got the cultural determinants, things like the way of life, the beliefs, the way of life of the community. So we've got economic determinants and cultural determinants that we are weighing up, and you are going to need to then think about that evaluative point of to what extent do you think economic determinants are more important than cultural determinants. With to what extent there, you might say you agree to a strong extent. You might say to some extent. You might say you disagree and the cultural determinants are more important. It's up to you how you decide to make this argument, but the most important thing is that you are justifying your points and that you are coming to that evaluative answer. But what do we need to think about here? Storm hazards. So in the AQA specification, we look at storm hazards, and in your answer, you are going to need to be thinking specifically about storm hazards. So it's always worthwhile spending some time to break a question down. That question has got a lot going on there. We need to be weighing up the economic determinants and the cultural determinants in the context of storm hazards and answering that to what extent, thinking, what do you think is the most important here? So even a 9-mark question can be really quite complex. So break it down, make sure you tackle each part of the question so you can get the best mark possible. So, okay, so let's have a little think about some exam gold, because if you've been following the other of these sessions in the series, and remember, they're available on Catch Up if you'd like to go back and have a look at some of these. So in the previous sessions, we've talked about the water cycle, we talked about the carbon cycle, and we talked about coastal landscapes. And in each of the sessions, I have been talking lots about the systems approach. The park model and the hazard management cycle that Gary talked to you about just now, they both use a systems approach to consider the hazards. They break it down into stages and they think about how those different stages are interconnected. So what you might find useful to do after this session is think about systems in relation to the hazards topic. What else does the systems approach give us that could be useful in analysing hazards? Also, why is the systems approach useful for geographers at all? Think about what I was saying earlier on in the very start of this, when we were talking about the facts that we've got the complex world, but what are its limitations? Okay, so over to Gary to finish this session off.
Okay, folks. Yes, indeed. Catherine has mentioned the replay sessions, which are available for you to look back that we've done in the past. We've also got some additional support. You can have a look at the hazard revision study notes, which have been produced for each of the units. Some really, really useful things there to print, perhaps, and to use to help with your revision for any forthcoming mock exams you may have. And we've also got online a hazards resource pack, which is extremely useful. A picture of the front cover is on screen there now. Which is also there for you to make use of to help with your preparation for any forthcoming examinations. So lots of help out there, lots of help.
Wow. Thanks, guys. A little bit over our 30 minutes there, but loads of really useful stuff. Absolutely fantastic.
I just realised the time. I was like, wow, that time has flown.
It has indeed. The world is a complex place. That's the message from tonight's session. Absolutely brilliant. Thanks ever so much. Thanks to everybody who took part in the online chat there. We just a few names that I wrote down: Anna, Tarantino, Alice, Alex, Ben. Thank you for your responses to those questions. Absolutely superb stuff. Thanks to Gary. Thanks to Catherine for organising and presenting tonight. Wonderful, wonderful as always, both of you. Thanks for that. Don't forget, guys, that the PowerPoint slides that you've been watching tonight are available immediately as soon as we've finished for download. So they're available. And if you want to, you can watch this all over again. It'd be really great if you've enjoyed tonight, if you give us a thumbs up on YouTube. That helps to tell other students around the world that this is a great place to come to if they want to find out the stuff they need to know for their A-level geography. Okay, thanks everybody. Good night to you all. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.